Okay. So good evening. And I welcome you all. For those of us that are meeting for the first time, so my name is Simon Jacobson. I say this both for people in the room here as well as online. And we share, as the mystics would put it, we share a certain intersection of our spiritual journey just by the fact that we are here together. Being that there are no accidents, and the places we travel to and the people we meet, the different opportunities that come our way, though they may appear to us as being random or accidental or driven by some mutual self-interest, the mystics will tell us that there are patterns and a script going on that's far beneath the surface and connects the dots in ways that is not always obvious to the naked eye. And therefore, every time two people interact, and or whatever number of people interact, there's some spiritual energy being released. And there is a need, there's a reason that these souls have to intersect at this particular time. That means that we all can benefit from it. We all can learn from each other. That's how I like to see this Wednesday night coming together. A type of soul intersecting, souls intersecting. And my job, so to speak, my role is to make sure we're aware of that and not lose sight of that deeper purpose. So though I may be doing the speaking and you the listening, but on that level, it's beyond words and silence, and people can connect and learn from each other even if they don't speak to each other. So I try to share words that are not necessarily coming from any innovative place inside of me, but rather from a more soulful place. In a sense, serving as the referee, I guess, or so-called person who is trying to bring together the vibes that are here in this room and amongst us, and in a way that we could all go away from this evening empowered, inspired, and come away with perhaps answers, or at least a direction, to many of the challenges that we are facing in our lives. Because that's what it all comes down to. If souls are going to intersect, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that we each grow through the process, and we grow in the areas that we are either struggling with or should be struggling with, or different dilemmas and challenges we have internally, or in our relationships, or in the lack of relationships and the potential of relationships. So people are either in a relationship, and it's either bad or good, or they're out of a relationship, and that could also be both bad and good, or somewhere in between, over and under. And so this is, in a way, I'm stating the mission of the general reason that we get together Wednesday nights. And specifically this evening, the topic being individuality versus conformity, which of course is immediately linked into the soul's dignified journey, the fact that each of us has our own unique, I used a new word last week, well it's not a new word, the new word that I've been using before, trajectory. Every soul has its particular path, and ups and downs, and dips, and what's the opposite of dips? Twists and turns, and then as souls come together, in a sense, we bring together our unique journeys, and in a healthy situation, not annihilating one another, but only enhancing our individuality, as well as complementing each other, so we all can grow through the synergy to a greater place. The reason I chose this topic, individuality versus conformity, even though it's really a universal topic we discussed at any given time, and it's always relevant, but particularly being that, using the Hasidic expression, that we live with the times, which means we live with the Torah that's read or studied in each particular time, meaning, as I discussed last week, that time in Jewish thought is energy, is a flow of energy, and therefore energy, as it goes through its journey, each period of time, each day, each week, even each second and each hour, has its particular power and particular energy. And to understand that energy doesn't take much. All you have to do is open up the Torah that's read during that period in time. And hence the expression that one of the great Rebbes, Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, said, one should live with the times. And living with the times means, as his son explained to the Hasidim, it means to live with the energy of that time, to live with the Torah of that time, Torah being essentially the blueprint that teaches us the different patterns and the different textures of different times of the year. So this particular chapter, which we read usually after Shavuos, the holiday Shavuos, sometimes before, but it's usually after, has many themes as usual, but one particular theme is the theme of individuality and its antithesis, conformity. And I'll explain that soon as we continue this discussion here. I should turn to that page, right? That would make sense. So, before we get to the chapter part of the Torah's insights on this matter, let's just pose the issue, put it on the table, and try to dissect it a bit. So, individuality, I'm sure everyone here would concur, and if not, just shake your head, and I'll understand. Individuality is something that I would say that most people consider to be a blessing. To not be a clone of someone else, and not be shaped by somebody else, but to be yourself. Is anyone that disagrees with that so far? Okay, good. For the people on the web, since we can't see whether you're shaking or not, all you got to do is just write an email. But before you do, listen to what I also have to say, because you have to see where this is going. Okay, so that each of us has a unique contribution to make, a mark on this world, our unique journey. This is considered to be a blessing, to be able to find your path, to find your unique path. It's not your father's, not your mother's, not other people who, with all good intentions, may feel they know better than you do what you should be doing, but your individuality. And of course, the opposite of that is when one does not know who they are. It's called identity crisis, or more psychological terms like people who developed the pleaser personality. They're always there to please others, and codependence. The list goes on of different types of personalities we develop in response to others around us. So even though this thing called individual, who am I, and what is my particular role in this world, in this life, is something that seems to be at the core of really that really makes everything sense. That makes sense of everything we do. Yet at the same time, it's not as simple as it sounds, because we don't come to Earth and just pop out in this world as individuals. We are under the control of, and we are nurtured, or not nurtured, but we are brought to maturity through different people and different forces at work. A child in this world comes into this world as a clean slate, as a pure soul, but you're born to parents. Everyone has parents. And parents, therefore, in their attitudes, from the moment you're born, and even prior to that, even in pregnancy, and even as they prepare to have a child, will shape and affect your attitudes. Their attitudes will affect yours, or ours, or each one of ours. So that's the first big factor. So then the question, just simply, without even going further, just taking that, since we are our parents' children, so we may be sitting here as adults, full-blown, developed adults, but how much of who you are and your decisions you make, and how you make decisions, how you don't make decisions, is shaped by what you picked up from your parents. Either copying what they're doing, maybe even unintentionally, or running the other direction to do exact opposite, but that too is a reaction to them. And their parents, in turn, were also children once, and shaped by their parents. So this is like a vicious cycle. But then when you take into account many other factors, and this includes education, and especially in our early formative years, then you have not just parents now to contend with, but also the educational forces at work, plus the peers, our classmates and other kids in our lives. And then you add into the equation the different experiences we've had. Some of us have had very pleasant and blessed childhoods. Some of us have had aborted childhoods, unfortunately. Things that were not in our control. This can be divorces, the other trauma, losses, deaths, many different things that affect us. And all these add up to shaping who you are. So by the time you begin to ask the question, who am I, as an individual, the deck is stacked, so to speak, because there's so many forces and factors at work, it's almost impossible even to know. Because we don't even remember consciously those factors that shaped us in the earliest stages of our lives. Most of our memories begin at age 2, 3, 4, and even then they're just little sporadic moments. Obviously a more serious thing one remembers, but children don't really, we as adults, if we think back on our childhood, you'll have to say, what class was I in? Where was I living? What happened? We associate things not in abstract terms of a chronology, but rather as things relate to a particular events. So it's not even that simple or easy to define or identify the forces that have shaped our identities. So to just say, okay, being an individual is a great thing, but as I said, we don't just start from scratch. We are, by the time we're seeking or we're trying to understand who we are, have been shaped in very profound ways. And I'm not even addressing anything that necessarily even negative. If you add to the equation, of course, an unhealthy childhood, an abusive one, then all that I just said becomes highly amplified and has very profound impact. But even without that, think of a child in an average home. Let's say, when I say average, I don't necessarily go by the numbers. Today I think average is not that great. But let's say a home that's relatively healthy. But even then, attitudes of parents have profound impact on children. That's how it is. And as I said, it's not just the parents, it's the education system, it's the environment, community, and I didn't mention country and culture. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Different countries definitely have different cultures. It says, Eretz Megadelis, Rashi says, the commentaries, the Medrash explains that each land has its own particular personalities. And you see that. Obviously, not to stereotype or overgeneralize. People are different and individuals in every particular country, but still there are certain cultural trends, cultural attitudes, even certain things like pleasantries of how you say thank you, when you say thank you, or certain etiquette, as they say. There's for some countries things that are considered to be rude, for other countries considered to be actually very respectful, so on. So there are those forces as well at work. And then we finally have to add into the whole picture, even as adults, the inundation that we are exposed to on a daily basis of everyone trying to sell us something. This includes advertising, and this includes all the visual images that you see. And there's so many and so multiple that I don't think we even know how many we see. How many visual images do you see today, for instance? I don't just mean sitting in front of a television intentionally or in front of a computer, internet. Images that you weren't even, you didn't invite in. You're walking in the street. Things that are being imposed upon you. reading a magazine. You're not interested necessarily in those ads. And so there's a constant barrage of information, imagery, visual, audio, auditory, and so on that is constantly, you could say it's an assault on us, even though we live in a free world, but in a sense, yeah, you can lock yourself up. It's an assault because you didn't invite it. I'm not even saying it's all bad, but it definitely has impact on us, or else no one would be spending billions of dollars of trying to pay for advertising and trying to get your attention. There's a reason that that investment is there, is because by getting your attention or getting you to buy into something, someone is making some money from it. So in other words, their intentions are not necessarily to educate you or to improve the welfare of your life. The objective is to make a few dollars. Sometimes it happens to be that what is being sold also improves your life. And that's the choices we have to make. But the point is, we are continuously being overstimulated and inundated with all kinds of forces. So when you decided this morning how to dress and where to go, I'm not talking about to work or other things, things that were so-called in your choice. How much of it really was your choice? How much of it is it part of a system that expects a certain type of, conformity is maybe too strong of a word, but expects certain behaviors, attitudes. No one wants to stand out. Nobody wants to look crazy. So where's that in-between place of being not complete clone, being some type of individual? So yes, I understand that people buy different clothing or make different statements through the images that they project. But that too is within a, who wrote the menu? How many options do you really have? And is it really completely some type of free expression, or is it within the so-called norm or within the standards of our society? You don't have the option, for example, to walk around like in, let's say, in Arab or Muslim garments. You would stand out in ways you wouldn't like, even though there may have been a culture once upon a time people wore those type of clothing, or in certain places in the world they do. I'm not suggesting anyone wants to express their individuality that way, but I'm just giving an example. What really is called, these standards are completely subjective, based on environment, based on society, and so on and so forth. So where exactly and how exactly can a person really express their individuality? Now you hear people waxing eloquent about how our free world, the United States, of course, you can get yourself an iPod. Is that what you have on this? Oh. And you choose what songs you want to listen to. So that's free expression. Whereas, let's say, in a autocratic society of a few hundred years ago, they chose, some authority chose what music you listen to. Now you can choose, freely choose among thousands, millions of different genres, and I mean, every day I hear another type of music there is. If you go on the plane, you suddenly realize a lot more categories. Either I'm getting old or something, but there used to be just 3-4 categories. Now it's like, there's jazz light and jazz modern and jazz classic, and the whole thing. Jazz used to once be just simply the sound of the streets, and now it's become itself in its commercial standards, and I'm sure Billboard magazine will identify the different commercialization of it. But the point being is, I'm not suggesting that we don't have more choices today. And yes, it's true, there's no government official and there's no authority that is telling us what we should read and what we shouldn't read. But that is small. It's just a small. It's barely a consolation. The forces that shape who we are not from outside today; they're from inside. As I said, if you are constantly screwing up your relationships, and then you can identify in therapy that it goes back to how your parents had a terrible relationship, that's not something that is being imposed upon us by some governmental official, but that's your whole psyche has been shaped by people around us. So even though, yes, you could argue you can choose as many of whatever songs you want to listen to, whatever books you want to read or not read, but the wiring of how we make those choices is defined by many, many forces that are not about ourselves. In other words, the bottom line is this: can you really separate yourself from the forces that have shaped you? That's the real question. Because that would really be freedom. Can you, in some way, rise above all those forces? And if the answer is yes, how is that possible? You're a product of those forces. How do you even know how to distinguish? So let's say different people have different reactions to a frustrating situation. One person withdraws, one person becomes aggressive, another gets angry. People have same situation, you don't get your way. How would you react? So there's a list of several options, only that many options. Who defines, why is one person's reaction different than another? Why does one person withdraw? Another person takes the bull by the horns. One becomes aggressive, angry, and whatever the list of other options there may be. What determined the way we reacted? So, psychologically speaking, the first thing you have to really look at, above all, is what influences in your life. What influence was there in your life? If, for instance, you see your brothers and sisters, your siblings, and your parents have the same reactions, that's a pretty good sign that you have to look there. Why does this family have the same reactions? Is it genetic, or is it something that the parents, that's how they dealt with problems? If one parent can withdraw when there's a problem, detach, another takes the other extreme, or something in between. Why we get angry? Why do some people have that anger in them, and others don't? I mean, it's easy, of course, to blame that the angry people are the ones that everyone's doing something bad to. But we know that that's not the situation. Anger is something, is how you react to things. We all have excuses to become angry, but some people do become and some don't. That's a fact. So why is that? Are we born that way? Is it the attitudes we picked up? And why it's so vital is because if it is an attitude that was imposed upon us, that right there your choices have been limited. Your individuality has been essentially compromised because you were never allowed to become who you could have become. Maybe had you not been exposed, let's say, to an angry parent or to a frustrated teacher or some other force or some other influence, you may have turned out with a completely different mechanism to deal with a frustrating situation. So there are these forces can have two effects on us. They either bring out the worst in us, or sometimes the best, of course. And the second thing, they may also, the other extreme is they may impede our ability to really become who we are. In other words, it could either affect you that your attitude and your behavior is shaped in a certain way because of those influences, or, as I said, what's the word I want to use? It represses the talents and skills you have. I meet people who have unbelievable talents and skills, and they're not only they're not aware of it, sometimes they are, but not only they're not aware of it, obviously they not doing anything to release those skills, and you have to always, when you see that, you always have to wonder why, because the natural reaction of a human being is, the natural process of growth is that things emerge. In other words, if you have a talent you're born with, or a skill or a particular strength, life is going to bring it out of you at some point. It may not be immediate. Doesn't mean at age 5. It could be at age 20. It could be at age 30. Because somewhere there'll be a challenge, and you'll rise to the occasion and suddenly realize you have this strength. It doesn't always happen consciously. So when you see someone who has a lot of strength inside of them, power inside of them, and it's not expressed, let's put it this way, the ratio between their potential and the actual is a very high one. I mean, they're very, very disparate. Then you know there's some force that stopped it from emerging. That's one of the ways we know we can identify a psychological block. When you see someone has, not necessarily from a negative thing, it's almost the opposite, from the positive thing that is not actualized. Why didn't it actualize? Why is the person not aware of it? Or even if they are, why don't they have the courage to let it emerge? Why have they not done anything about it? Because there's nothing more painful than a talent that you have inside of you, and it's not allowing it to come out. I mean, anyone that has that knows that it's one thing learning how to cultivate it, but just that it remain locked inside of a person is a very, very, it's like a trap. So what is the reason? There has to be some influence, some fear. And this doesn't mean necessarily tracing it to one event. It can be an accumulative series of events. For instance, just to give an example, I've dealt with, more than once, but recently that comes to mind, a person who was exactly that way. I saw a lot of potential, and almost anything the person was doing was almost undermining, not almost, actually undermining the release of the potential, the job he chose, the relationship he chose, everything he chose was like exact counter to what his particular potential was. So it was clear to me that there must be a reason that he wasn't aware of. What was the reason? The reason was he grew up, and he came to discover this. He grew up in a home where his mother basically annihilated her whole personality for his father, who insisted on that. So an insecure father forced a woman with many, many talents and skills to basically not excel. Not only not excel, to become mediocre, so he should feel good about himself, or shouldn't feel bad about himself. And as a result, this child growing up in a home with a mother nurturing him that had such frustration, it almost like it created that he too will never actualize himself, whether it's fear or it was just emulating. That doesn't really matter what the exact reason is, but the bottom line is, here's a perfect example. So, is this person an individual? Has his individuality been allowed to emerge? Obviously not. Not due to his own fault, but due to a circumstance that impacted him from a young age. And even once he became aware of it, that doesn't mean the problems are solved. It just means that now he's aware. Now the question is, how do you undo the damage, or how do you cultivate? And we'll discuss how that's done. But the reason I'm elaborating about this is basically based on one principle, which is that Yediyas HaMachla is Chetzi Refuah in Hebrew, which means the awareness of a problem is have the cure. Without identifying a problem and just ignoring the root of it, you never can find a cure. Or maybe you can. I can't say never. You never say never. But very extremely difficult. So the expression goes that knowledge, awareness of a problem is half the cure. So before we even talk about individuality versus conformity, the first question has to be is how individual we really are. And this requires a little brutal honesty that we may not like to even subject ourselves to. Because some of you may think you're very individualistic, and you're a very strong a strong, deep sense of fierce individuality, as they like to say. And you may even think you're expressing it, when in truth it may not be the case. Because what are you basing it on? Of course, it feels good to sound like you're an individual. When you were challenged to really be an individual, did you choose the easy way or the harder way? And I'm not here to burst anyone's bubbles, because I'm sure that everybody here has some elements of individuality that you've acted upon. That's not what I'm suggesting, that you don't have any of it, or that you don't aspire. But to truly diagnose where you stand as far as an individual versus a conformist requires more than just what you think you are, or what you like to think you are, but also a sum total of all the forces in your life that have shaped you. That's the bottom line. Because you can go through your whole lifetime thinking that you're fiercely individualistic, and end up finding out that you were just a scared child, and you were just rebelling. And you confuse that with individualism. Because individualism also means you're going to make a mark that's very unique. So when is that mark going to begin? Not that you have to prove it to me or to anybody else, but individuality has certain ways to express itself. There is a reality check. It's not just what you think you are. It has true consequences in this world. Abraham in the Bible was a true individualist. How do you know this? Because he, till this day, thousands of years later, stands out as the father of monotheism, the father of all the major religions, the one who defied the entire standard of his time at heavy prices, and not because he knew he's going to be awarded or rewarded, and that one day we would talk about him as an individual, because he was a true individual. So he had no idea what would happen. He was just who he was. So in other words, it's not just about whether everyone says you're an individual and not a conformist. It comes from within. It has nothing to do with what people are going to say. That's part of being an individual. You know, if you feel that you have to be fiercely individualistic because then if people may look down at you if you're not, you can understand that's a little contradiction of terms. In other words, you're satisfying other people because they expect you to be unique. You know, it's like the guy that is forcing is twisting his child's arm and says, "Be free, be free." You know, and the more he twists, he says, "Until you act free, I'm going to keep twisting your arm." You know, in other words, freedom is something that comes from within. It's not just a show. So, with that being said, you could really put it this way: that we have an individualistic spirit and soul within us. The question is how much of it has really emerged and expressed itself in this world. So there's no question that everyone here, everyone on this earth has something of that nature. That is that first axiom of any spiritual system, and especially the Torah, that each human being was created in the divine image, and by virtue of that has a unique and indispensable mission, indispensable role to play, that no other person that ever lived or ever will live can do but you. That's a given. That still doesn't mean you're an individualistic person. It just means that you have that in your soul. Now the question is, as I said before with the ratio, how much of that has been actualized? 1%? 0? 10%? 100%? That's the real question that a person should ask themselves. And here's where I come to this week's chapter that addresses the whole topic. You have in this chapter, it's called Naso. The chapter is Naso, and it discusses, it's actually the longest chapter in the entire Torah, quantitatively speaking. So it discusses, not in the beginning, but as the chapter continues in the middle, it gets into the offerings. I'm just looking which section here. It begins in section 7. We're talking about number 7:1. So you begin the discussion of the different offerings that each of the leaders of the 13 tribes brought to dedicate the temple. It's called the Nisim. Sometimes it's called the 12 Nisim, the 12 leaders. These chapters are actually read not just now, but they read them several times a year. There's a custom to read them every day of the first 12 days of Nisan, before Passover. And they're also read on Hanukkah, because Hanukkah talks about the dedication of the temple. So then, too, this section is read. So this is several times a year where focus is placed on this particular section. Now, the Torah is very precise and very concise, actually, and it does not elaborate in many, many areas. There's actually stories that are so fundamental, like the story of the Garden of Eden. As popular as it may be, and as much as we know about it, in the Bible itself, it's just several verses, maybe 5, 6 verses, a little more, maybe 12 verses. Other chapters in the Torah that talk about such very fundamental issues don't take up much space. They're written concisely, short, brief. So it's surprising when you see that suddenly, when it comes to this chapter, you talk about the offerings of the tribes, the leaders. The Torah literally is repetitive, because each of the leaders brought the same offerings. And the Torah goes out of its way to repeat it 12 different times. The only difference is the name of the person. So say in the day 1, the leader of the tribe of Yehuda brought so and so. And it gives a whole list of Nachshon ben Amminadab, the one who jumped into the water first. So it says exactly what his offering was. And in detail, the number of all the different bowls and the different coins and so on and so forth, the different flour. And then it comes the second day. So you could think, okay, second day, Nisan ben Sur, the leader of the tribe of Yisachar. So if he brought a different offering, okay, you can explain why you would spell it out. But he brings exactly, literally, verse after verse, repeats it. So the Torah could have easily said that this came to the second leader of the tribe, he brought the same offerings as the first one. And the third did the same, or even more concise, that all the 12 leaders brought these and these offerings, and that's it. You would save a lot of space, and seemingly nothing would be lost. As I said, it's inconsistent with the Torah. It's the same Torah. A sentence before, a sentence later, can say things in one sentence, and you're waiting to see a little more elaboration, and we have to rely on commentaries to read between the lines, etc., etc. So one of the answers given for it is because each of the 12 tribes, each 12 leaders, brought the same offerings, but with a different kavanah, which means with a different intention, different feelings, with different spirit. However, as I said, that the Medrash can say that even if the Torah did not spell out each one again and again and again. What it tells us is this, that in the big question about religion in general and faith, this issue of individuality versus conformity is glaringly obvious, because as many people would argue, especially in our day and age, that religion, demands and requires conformity. It requires that people follow a certain code of law. That's what religion means. Religion means you are following the authority, whether you consider it the authority of God or the authority of divine inspired laws, but its basis is a certain set of laws, a code, however you want to put it, that not one person, but but all people are subject to. That's the basis of religion. The justification for it is because this moral code is what is critical for us to be able to coexist. The reason for our being, to serve God, to serve a higher calling. If we didn't have this code, we'd all follow our own whims. We'd follow our own subjective interests, which can become self-destructive and definitely destroy each other. So the reason for following this code is in order to create a just and moral and humane society. But it requires certain conformity. So there's a price to pay for this to live up to a higher calling. Now you could apply this, of course, also not just to religion, to any constitution. Constitution of the United States, and this country has its laws. And if you break the laws and you get caught, there are consequences. So that too, you can say, is a certain form of conformity that's demanded of us. If you want to live in a just society, you want to live under the protection of the United States, for instance, there are certain rules that there's a give and take. The government will protect you or provide you certain services if you follow certain guidelines. If not, there are guidelines, there are consequences, rewards and punishments. But let's not go into the government. Let's talk about the religion. Obviously, is much more demanding, and more importantly, as many would argue, a free government like ours, a democracy does not dictate what you do in your personal life. That's the whole pointing of the separation between church and state. Whereas religion does demand and expect of you to behave a certain way in your privacy, in your kitchen and in your bedroom and in your personal life and the choices you make. One could argue, imposes upon you a code of law, and imposes on a group of people that code of law. And that is if that's not conformity, what is conformity? As I said, the justification for it is because you get a return for it that maybe is worth this so-called giving up part of your individuality. What I just described is essentially, I'll call it a stereotype, but it is the common perception of religion by many, 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 many people. And for good reason. If any of you have ever gone to religious school, religious environment, you know that's one of the things that happens is that these type of expectations and demands. And if you waver or you in any way rebel, there are severe consequences. In some communities more severe than others, of course, but it's not that simple. Some will talk about growing up in a ghetto-like environment, insulated and maybe protected, but also as long as you play by the rules. As soon as you don't, what we call a witch hunt takes place. And different communities do it in different fashion. And religion definitely has been guilty, religious communities, of this. So this isn't just a fantasy of Woody Allen or some other skeptics of our time, cynics of our time. It is a reality in many communities. So there's no question that religion has been painted in this fashion, and until this day, even today as we speak, you'll find communities and individuals that go by this. Some will deny it, but some won't. Some will say exactly right. This is God's rule, and this is how you do it. Now we live in an age where we're all just talking about a thing called fundamentalism, Muslim fundamentalism. And of course there's Christian fundamentalism and there's Jewish fundamentalism and the other so-called fundamentalisms. How is it defined by most of us? It's a community or an environment that does not tolerate for anyone to break the law. And if there is a break, there are consequences. There are countries in the world that are run by religious law, Muslim countries. Actually, the whole separation of church and state came as a result of over a millennia of abuse of individuality due to religion, which is why the separation was put into place in the first place. That there should be no church and there should be no authority that should dictate how people should live their lives. So this issue of individuality versus conformity takes on definitely a whole new twist when you're dealing with religion in general, and obviously I'm discussing Judaism in particular here. So what exactly is the story? Because the question here is a much more fundamental one. And this is something I myself, as a teenager, growing up in a, I wouldn't call it a fundamentalist home, because my home was not that way, but I saw elements of fundamentalism in my life, and school and so on, especially by the more brainless of the authorities and teachers, where it was considered actually to be sinful, or actual sin, to be in any way rebellious or to challenge or to question. So I was quite aware of this effect, this I guess attitude, and what disturbed. I don't know if I put it quite in those words when I was younger, but what was most disturbing to me was really not so much that people are that way, because you come to learn, listen, there are insecure people everywhere, and religion does not have a monopoly on insecure people, nor does it have a monopoly even on fundamentalism, because you go to any community, even secular communities that have no religion, there's also guidelines, and if you break the rule, you can be ostracized. Pariahs and ostracization is not a religious concept. This exists in every community, and there are plenty of books that have been written about it. There's the rules, the unspoken rules, whether it's of the Victorian era or of our times as well. With all our so-called freedoms, there are rules. There are unspoken rules in every group. Whether these are groups, whether it's groups who, as I said, religious or not religious. So that I understood, and I still do, that there's no question we live in a world where there are going to be people, whether it's either due to control, or it's due to power, or due to fear of people breaking out of a certain, breaking the rules, or it's just plain insecurity. When you're insecure, you want everyone else to be insecure as well. It feels better. So to really have a true individual is not exactly makes insecure people very, very good. Doesn't make them feel good. You've all read, I'm sure, George Orwell's 1984, and that's not a religious society he's describing. He's describing whether some called communism couched in the ways he put it, another sequel to Animal Farm, or however you want to put it, but there's clearly a study of the needs and demands of a society for all the good reasons that Mr. O'Brien spells out, in order to keep a certain control, mind control, demanding absolute conformity to the point where you have to go against the grain of your own nature, and war is peace, and whatever is intuitive is wrong, and the whole challenge of 1984. I remember when 1984 actually came around. Well, didn't really live up to exactly that. I mean, or some people said it happened long before 1984. However you want to put it. But the point is that the concept of strict conformity and demands of conformity are not exclusive to religion. So that I understood. What bothered me was something much more fundamental. And this is it. That societies, man-made societies, and human being and human institutions should have demands for conformity. Yeah, it makes sense. The people in power want the people not in power to conform to their rules. That's how they stay in power. It's completely logical to me. I'm not saying it's just, but what do you expect? Someone who's in power, who has control, who has the money, who's able to exert that control, why should they want to give it up? So they have to some way create some controls to make sure the masses or the groups don't rebel. So in earlier ages or middle ages, it was maybe done by brute force, and today it's done a little more sophisticated, masked in what we call democracy or freedom. You know, some people say it's a few individuals with money that control everything. And when you start trying to analyze the economy, which we realize today how futile that is, and there's no such thing as economic experts, there's a lot of strength to this theory. The question is who's really running the show. I'm not really sure about, but it could be whoever does have the largest amounts of monies, and of course they're not advertising it. Some will argue there's deep conspiracies. I'm not from the conspiracy theory people, but I definitely understand the idea that people in power and have the means are going to definitely do things and create systems that we will not be aware of to make sure they continue that power. Where that manifests is another question. You know, to look around everywhere you go and say every person you meet, every corner you go, there's a conspiracy there. I'm not ready to say that, but there's somewhere something, some smoking gun somewhere. I don't know where it is yet. Maybe you can help us. You're in the banking industry. Some say it's in Switzerland. Anyway, so what bothered me was, and continues to bother me, but that's what I'm addressing is, so man-made structures demand conformity. Yeah, you want to join my structure, these are the rules. You don't like it, you're out. Again, this is nothing about fairness. It's just simply the human nature of those in power want to continue to be in power. That has to require some form of conformity, or at least in some way subdue or tame or keep under control people's needs to be themselves, so to speak. Because that can upset the balance. The problem is, that's all nice and good in man-made systems, but in a divine system, if religion has any significance, it's because it's a divine system. It's not just another control game. At least I could not accept that to be that case, even though there's some that make that argument too. People are essentially animals, so you need to create a code of law called religion to keep them at bay. But if religion is based on a divine system, so here's the big question, philosophical question. God created individuals in this world. He did not create clones. The fact is no two people are alike. Not personality-wise, not soul-wise, not in so many ways. I mean, we have common things. We all need to eat. We all need to sleep. We all breathe. But when it comes down to, however, distinctions in our personality, we have many, many distinctions. And the Talmud says, Ein de'er sein shavas. People do not have same perceptions of things. They don't think alike, just like there are no two faces that are alike. So God created fierce individuals, billions of them today. Once it was millions, but the numbers don't matter here. Created individuals. And then He gave a system to the human race to what? To annihilate the individuality that He created them with. That makes no sense. I remember when I was, I don't know, remember what age, 16, 17, I don't remember what age. So I wasn't necessarily a particularly devout student, I can tell you that. Not going into details. But I remember asking this question to someone who so-called was trying to tame my rebellion. So I said, let me ask you something. Does it make any sense? You know, he was trying to say that, you have to follow certain guidelines and rules and stuff like that. And that was not really exactly something that I was into. So I said to him, does it make any sense that God would create you as unique, me as unique, so many unique people, and then ask us all to erase that uniqueness and just become all the same and follow a certain religious code and just do this and not that and that? Well, I was old enough, so he didn't give me a whack, but he basically dismissed me as one would dismiss somebody. Like he says, you think you don't understand nothing. That's what he told me, basically, if I recall correctly. It doesn't matter whether I was right or wrong, but let's put it this way: he did not get through to me, and I came to realize that is the fundamental question. To make a statement that religion demands conformity is, to me, the biggest contradiction of terms, because the basis of religion, as the Bible states it, is that God created the human being unique. Each of us unique. So how could the same Torah, the same Bible, the same code suddenly demand that we all become conformists? It doesn't make sense. It's like going against. God says, I created you with blue eyes, but because everybody has brown eyes, you have to change them. So obviously that's not a commandment in the Torah, just for the record. But the same is true with in the areas of our own individuality. So as I went through my rebellion and my anarchy, I came to realize, and I'm not going through my own journey, my whole journey here, but to make a long story short, I came to realize something which not this teacher, not any other teacher really taught me. I read it myself. When I started looking in, it could not make sense to me that the religion of Abraham and all these fierce individuals like Moses, who defied governments and defied their own communities, they even defied their own religious establishments, created a system that is all about conformity. It didn't make any sense. I came to realize that it was being grossly misrepresented, and maybe the most abusive thing of all is teaching religion in terms of conformity. If you look in the Torah, and I mentioned this last week as well, I believe, most of the Torah, especially the Ten Commandments, are all written in the singular, as if God is speaking to one person. In Hebrew, there's a word that you use, like you say aleichem, lachem, when you speak to a group. When you speak to one person, you say lecha or loch, if it's feminine. And the Torah in the Ten Commandments speaks, even though it is words said to millions of people, it all speaks in singular terms, as if you're speaking to one person. And the Medrash explains because each person heard it in his or her own way. So then how do you reconcile these two things? That you have a religion that's built on a system of very strict guidelines, and if you follow the orthodox interpretation, it's the letter of the law, you cannot waver from it. How is that consistent with an individuality? And that's the answer to the question of this week's chapter, of why the same offerings are repeated again and again. Had the Torah just said that Nachshon ben Amminadab, the first leader of the tribes, brought an offering, and then all the others brought the same thing, that would have been the perfect example of absolute conformity. The Torah goes and elaborates, literally, that it sounds like that each one is bringing the same thing, but it repeats it again and again, because it teaches us the secret of how how individuality is not compromised just because two people do the same thing. You see, the key here is to know that independence is not defined by what you do, but defined on why you do it. We could be sitting here in the room and each one of us is doing something else, and none of us are being individuals. As a matter of fact, it may be coming from a place that's the exact opposite. Or we be sitting here in this room and each of us doing exactly the same thing, and it doesn't mean it's conformity. Just because it looks like everybody's doing the same thing, it doesn't mean that it is coming from a place of weakness or the need to suppress people's individuality. And I'll give you an example. I remember seeing, not often, but I've seen Chassidim davening, praying for hours and hours under a talis. In a real way, Shabbos, someone's getting under a prayer shawl and sitting and praying for 6-7 hours. So you could think a person sitting like that, they must be not moving, not budging, but some way going into some deep meditation to places, who knows where they travel to. And then contrast it with people who travel millions of miles, have a lot of frequent flyer miles, and they're just running for their lives. Who is a freer person? The person who's sitting 7 hours and not moving, or the person who's everywhere, every night in a different place? So on an external level, you'd think the second one is definitely the bohemian, the free spirit. But as I said, it's not dependent. It does not define free spirit. Freedom is not defined by what you do, but why you did it, why you do it. That person running may be running for their lives, and they're not secure or comfortable to stay anywhere, to make any commitment. I know many people in the guise of free spirit is just another fear. It's fear hidden in this type of I'm everywhere. I don't commit to anything. This person sitting under the tal praying, that commitment is by choice from within. No one's forcing him or her to sit there. No one forced him to sit there. By sitting there, by choice, that can be much freer than the person who doesn't have that discipline. So, to use even maybe a better example, let's take the example that I always use for this, music. So is music conformity or free, individualistic? So very few people could find music as conformist. Yet, musical notes are as rigid as they come. You cannot create more musical notes than there are on the scale. There are that many keys on a piano. And no one's coming up and creating a new type of sound. What I mean by that is I mean a new note. Yet, within that structure, you can create new sound because there's infinite amount of combinations of how you play that music. One person can play those notes and it sounds like dead. Another person can take those notes and it brings you completely alive to another, transports you to another time and place. I think I mentioned this also last week. So the fact that there's a structure called notes, the fact that there are people who sit and discipline themselves to play an instrument, and even against their will, when they were children, they necessarily liked to be trapped, so to speak, taking lessons or that discipline that's necessary. And then they begin to play music. Those notes bring you to a place that's beyond any structure. So the fact that two people may say the same prayer, or two people may do the same mitzvah, and externally it looks like it's the same act, but internally it can be completely from different places. And that's what I came to discover, that's what Judaism demands of us. The reason there's a system is no different than the reason that there are musical notes. Same notes will be taught to every musical student to the end of time. But what will also be taught is that you, once you know these notes, bring your personal soul and your personal flavor and touch into it and transform it in ways that no one ever was able to. In a sense, the Torah and its mitzvahs and its guidelines are really tools, like a hammer and a screwdriver, or musical notes if you want to put it that way. Tools. What you do with those tools, everybody could be using the hammer the same way. That's called conformity. Or you can bring your own individuality and those tools become tools for you to fly to places that someone else cannot fly to. The key is, of course, to learn how to use these tools in that fashion. So I'm not here to deny the fact that 99% probably of religious people will not agree with what I just said. I don't know if they won't agree. Let's put it this way. They would not have said it on their own. Because religion has gotten that type of message. And religious families and homes convey that message to their children. This is what God wants you to do. Or, a little more intelligent explanation, because by giving up some of your freedoms, you embrace a higher purpose that is more constructive. You just follow your own heart, your own Yetzer Hara, you can become self-destructive and destroy others. Now, this is the common arguments. But you're not going to hear very many that say, these are tools for you to fly, for you to become an individual. Not just that you compromise your individuality, or you can still be a little individual, that these actually will allow you to become the greatest person you can become. In other words, you people playing music freestyle or by ear. They don't know notes. I'm one of them, by the way. I can play piano without notes, but with notes I can't. So, are there limits to that? Major limits, because the notes were never meant to contain. The notes is a language, a time-tested language, whatever you want to call it, that has proven to become the shortcuts or the easy way to express the most profound type of musical expression. So a person who reads the notes and plays by ear, obviously is going to be far greater because they know the structure. In other words, these structures are not meant to limit, they're meant to reveal, they're meant to help us grow. There's a way to fly. There are methods. And in that context, therefore, the entire Judaism, the entire Torah is meant to help us discover our individuality. That's what I'm here to tell you. Not only not to suppress it, to discover it. So what does that mean? So what does that mean, going back to the whole discussion of individuality and conformity? It means the following. The only thing that forces us to become conformists are man-made attitudes. Left to your own devices, allowing your soul to just express itself, you would be the most individual person possible. The problem is, the way God made it was that he takes the individual soul and throws it into a prison. The prison is called this material world. And it includes our homes, and includes our schools, and includes everything that will influence us. I know this may sound harsh, because it sounds like you against the world, but in a way it is. It's your soul against the world. I am not saying that this world doesn't have many beautiful gifts, but never think that this world is going to give you individuality. Your individuality comes from your soul. This world, what it does, for good or for bad, it will do everything to stop your soul from being itself. Even healthy parents, mind you, can help undermine your individuality. I mean, truly healthy parents will understand that a child, once they grow up, would be given the ability to really really fly. But that's what it comes down to. Think of a bird. A bird, for it to fly, requires not just wings, but also confidence that it can fly and feel comfortable. Do you think a bird, for instance, I mean, I never interviewed a bird, but tell me what you think. Maybe some of you have spoken to some birds. You know, those days when you have no one else to speak to. Like you can have a conversation with a bird. Do you think a bird, for instance, that never had a nest, God forbid, a bird grown up, let's say as soon as it was born, it was thrown out of its nest or lost its family and home. You think a bird without a nest really can fly or not? I don't mean technically. I'm sure they can technically fly. What I'm trying to say is that there's no question that for a bird to truly fly, at least metaphorically, it needs to have the early stages of building strength and confidence in itself. Or else it will constantly be searching for its nest and its home. Maybe that's why it will fly. To fly with confidence and strength requires a stage where you're not flying, where you are being protected, and you're being nurtured, and you're being given the strength so that day comes for you to be a true individual. And look at this in nature. You know, nature doesn't lie. Humans, everyone has their theories. Look at nature. The things that are freest are the things that have the most solid foundations. Trees are sometimes described by poets as being free spirits because they grow and they expand into the sky, and they're spreading their so-called wings, their branches and leaves and so on. But look down at the bottom of the tree. Besides the tree trunk, you have solid roots that have taken root. Well, I don't want to use the word root twice, but and because they have their solid roots, they build a certain foundation, and then the confidence to fly. The same, wherever you look, you'll see the same type of idea. Like I said with music, it's precisely its structure that allows the freedom that music brings us to places that no other sound can bring us to. So what I'm saying is that when you talk about conformity and individuality, you have to know what causes conformity. What causes conformity are human beings imposing their own fears and insecurities upon each other. A spirit, a soul, on its own is unfettered. And then it comes down to this earth, into a body. So the body itself is definitely a prison. The body has needs. It needs to eat, it needs to sleep, it has other physical needs. But there's a soul that is alive inside of us, a restless soul, which is why we are restless people. And angst that you want to go somewhere, you want to travel somewhere. You want to go on some journey. But there's the body that you have to contend with. And then there's the people around you that you have to contend with. And they're all the forces, I'm not going to enumerate them again, that affect us throughout our lives. So I don't want to call them the enemy, because some of them also happen to be our friends. And some of them also can be forces that help us in the journey. But there's a part of them that is an enemy. And I say enemy, not necessarily malicious. The enemy is that, whether they like it or not, they are causing us to silence our voice in some way. Now, there are malicious enemies, those that really want to impose upon us that. There are parents that are like that. And there are others that want to control us. But even those that are not wanting to control, the fact is this world is run by systems that are very built on a lot of insecurity, and therefore don't want an individual spirit to just express itself. So how does a person free themselves from these forces? The answer is you have to learn to hold on to for your dear life, to your soul. You have to learn to trust its voice, and to allow it to express itself. And when it starts expressing itself, to have the courage that even if some don't like it, that's how you do it. This doesn't mean you have to intentionally hurt anybody and not intentionally defy anyone, but you have to learn what your voice is like. And this can be taught. This is not something that is impossible. That's why I mentioned earlier, have the cure of an illness, of a problem, is awareness. If you are aware of what I'm describing here, then you're halfway there. You have to define what causes the conformity. And the conformity will be driven in our lives by fear. Fear of, you want to be accepted. You want to be accepted, you have to follow certain things. Fear of our own insecurity of failure. A lot of fears that can drive a person not to follow their voice. So just to say, listen, I'm going to be fearless one morning, doesn't work that way. You have to find an alternative to hold on to. You need a strong base. And that strong base is the soul inside each of us. And there are methods how a person cultivates that soul. And here's some of the methods. In this week's chapter, we talk about these 12 leaders. They brought an offering in the temple. What's an offering? A korban in Hebrew means to get closer to. The word korban actually doesn't mean sacrifice. It really means to get closer to. It comes from the word kiruv, as it says in the Sefer HaBoher. It's a Kabbalistic work, a very ancient Kabbalistic work. Each of them brought an offering where? Into a holy sacred temple. They took their material items that they were blessed with, and they offered it to something greater than themselves. Every time you do an act that is not driven by your needs, you are somewhat becoming more individual. Every time you do something that's driven by self-interest, you become more of a conformist. Think of it that way. And you say, what does that mean? That doesn't make sense. What do you mean? If I'm right now selfish and doing something for self-interest, that is like a most individual expression possible. Yes, the individual expression possible of a very narrow, myopic person in a material world. But not necessarily the individuality of your soul. It's the individuality of what you see right now is good for you. Everything you see that's good for you, remember, has been shaped by forces that have made you see it that way. The idea of being able to offer something, to bring an offering, the idea to offer yourself or something that you have to something outside of you, beyond yourself, is the greatest expression of individuality, because it goes against all the human tendencies that are driven by self-interest. Remember, the forces that cause you to conform are also driven by self-interest. So what do you think? Your self-interest is not going to feed that? So in a strange way, some things that we think we're doing that is so individualistic may be the things that are actually the exact opposite. So how does one decide? How does one determine this? Well, it's not that simple because we're not that objective. So another point to know is to be around soulful people. When you're around people who are like that, it tends to feed and also strengthen your own commitment. We have to remember that we are in some ways in a trance. We are in some ways hypnotized, seduced, whatever word you want to call it, in a matrix that keeps us under control in a certain way. And the biggest part of all that is our material interests. I'm not suggesting self-interest per se or material interest is a bad thing. But if it's the only thing that drives your life, you are then a victim of it, and you are a conformist, whether you like it or not. To play music, to play your soul's music, you need to let your soul express itself. Your soul only expresses itself when it is giving, not when it's taking. Taking is the most conformist thing you can do. Everybody does that. Giving is only you give only the way you can give. I know some people will make a case and say, well, I know how to take in ways that are very unique that nobody else knows how to take. Well, if you're proud of that, that's very nice. But I would submit that that means that you have a uniqueness. My individuality is I'm a unique type of parasite. You know, I'm a parasite like no other. Okay, so first of all, we all know it doesn't sound so great, so I'm sure no one's going to put that on their resume. But I will say the following. You think that's so unique? I'll show you a few parasites that can probably match yours as well. Because taking is not, we're all more or less the same way we take. Yes, it may be with the right hand, with the left hand, with this method, that method. But the end of it all is, it's not about you. It's about what someone else is giving you. So all you really did unique was you knew how to manipulate to get it. Great. That you feel that's a real expression of individuality. So what the Torah says, like in this case with the offerings, you want something unique? Tell me, what do you have to give that's unique? I'll never forget the scene. I just remind myself, actually, as we were speaking here. It was very humorous, I remember. I was like in my early 20s. And a guy was giving a talk. And he was actually very good. It was very inspiring. But there was some smart aleck in the audience who thought he was smarter than him and kept on interrupting. And everything he said was like he contradicted. You know, why he was doing that, I have no clue. But I remember I was sitting there, and then this older man stood up in the audience and turned to this young so-called whippersnapper and said, you know, I've been sitting here watching for half an hour how you are pestering this teacher or this guy speaking. Everything he says, you have something to rebut with. Can you tell me some original idea that you have that I'd like to hear so we can like benefit from your brilliance? Obviously, the guy had nothing to say. You know, it's like in yeshiva they had an expression called the ipchem estavriniks. It's an expression from the Talmud which means someone who always has something contradictory to say, but you never hear anything original from them. So when you come up to heaven after 120 years, so it goes before the heavenly court, and they say, so tell us something, tell us an idea, some original ideas. So he said, my expertise is, he tells God, you say something and I'll contradict it. In other words, but an original idea. So what kind of individual is this? I'm not even getting into the security insecure thing. It's a person who may not have anything to say, and like they say, some people hide their ignorance with their arrogance, basically. And one way of doing that is just always having to contradict somebody else. And when you're put on the spot, say something. Let me hear what you have to say, and let us see whether we can contradict you. This is the difference in taking and giving. The challenge in real life is, can you give? Because what is unique about you is how you give, not how you take. We all human beings more or less take the same way. Listen, we all need to eat. So some people like this, someone likes that food. How unique can it really be? Okay, I know some people say, well, their uniqueness is in the exquisite culinary foods that they make or they eat. It's true, there's a certain element to that. I'm not suggesting that you can't have anything unique there. But ultimately, it's also what you give. It's what you create. You create a food, not what you just eat. Some people say, you know, I have great taste. I always like to eat this, I like to eat that. And they have a better taste than some other people who are eating other things. Well, I'm here to tell you that individuality has a little more higher standards than that. And that is your ability to give. Because your soul is a giver, not a taker. It's your body. And everything physical and material, that's a taker. Those that learn to give are the ones that learn to free themselves from the trap of the conformity that is imposed upon us from all the forces, whether it's parents, education, society, advertising, all of it. Because all those are forces that are being hurled at you, that you've absorbed and have shaped you. So what are you going to do to really counter that? The only way is to go to another place, which is That's what shaped me. That's what I've taken in. You go to another plane when you say, I'm going to give something. That was not necessarily imposed upon you. You're going to give something which is of your own choice, when you want and how you want. Okay, so you can argue that, well, one second. Giving may also come from our parents. If our father or mother were giving people, that also trained us to be givers. It's true, if it's being done only because it's another habit, then probably it's not necessarily such an individualistic thing. But that's why giving doesn't just go by doing what your parents taught you to do. It's also going out of your comfort zone. That's what really the point here is. It's doing things that are not always so convenient. So counterintuitively and paradoxically, our individuality is expressed in the things that we may not like most. Let's put it that way. If you like it too much, it's probably one of the forces that have caused you to be a conformist. Because that's what conformity, after all, is. I don't say conformity comes from the word comfort, but it sounds like it. It is ultimately a comfort zone. The comfort zone, it's easier. The ones that are true leaders or pioneers are the ones that took a road less traveled, which means a path that's not as easy. And it's usually not just easy because others aren't doing it, but because you're not being driven by others' expectations. So, for practical terms, the ways, the methods, one, as I said, is to learn that you have to bring offerings. And even if your offering may look like somebody else's, it's your offering, and you can put into it what you want to put in it. It's in your control. When you take, it's not in your control. I mean, yes, obviously you can take one thing and not take another, but there's not the uniqueness, the creativity is not there. When you give, it's different. Let's take, for an example, you're sitting here in this class here. I'm the one that's speaking. So I speak as I feel right. You're listening. So you don't really have control over what you're going to listen to because I'm the one that's doing the speaking. However, when you take these ideas, which aren't my own, and you yourself will share with someone, or yourself will apply it, that's already your own creation. And just as I'm a student of my teacher and teachers. So in the process of receiving, which is necessary, I'm not suggesting receiving isn't necessary. That's why I said a bird needs its nest. We all need our roots. We all need a place when we are receiving. But your individuality will be expressed when you begin to do something with it. If you just live off the fat of the land, or you just always remain riding on someone else's strengths or someone else's gifts, then your individuality remains trapped. You become individual when you take that initiative, when you share something, when you do something unique. Everyone here in this room tonight and tomorrow can do something, either with thoughts that you heard here this evening or other things that are not necessarily from this room. By taking initiative, by sharing it with someone, by doing something, sending an email to somebody, anything that was initiated by you, your individuality begins to express itself there. That doesn't mean doing one thing suddenly you become this fierce individual, but that's the way you feed it. And as your soul is fed, the more it wants, and the more it will express itself. So it's really almost like reversing the arrow in our lives, whether we are taking, or we are beginning to give. And the giving is the direct cause, the offering, to a person's individual spirit. Now, the journey is not easy because we have our habits, and we will gravitate back to so-called our comfort zones. That's why it requires commitment, and it requires, as I said earlier, to be with others that are that way. You commit to things. You are committed with another person to something, so you both give each other strength. That in the moment that you both want to have a moment of weakness, is another person you've committed to. You're connected with someone else. What do you think love ultimately, after all, is, if not that? That's why love and commitment are really one. It's the ability to go beyond yourself and to stick with it, not just when it's convenient. To stick with it to the point where you can transcend your own self-interest or comfort zone and reach a greater place. That's why ultimately falling in love, committing to love, marrying, building something from it is the ultimate expression of individuality. So yes, Woody Allen says marriage is the death of hope. But then we look at Woody Allen's life and you tell me, I don't know if he's the birth of hope. So Brilliant man, I'm not taking away that from him. But yes, certain marriages are the death of hope. Marriages that are done in that fashion. The ones driven by love, healthy love, and driven by a cause greater than two individuals, and driven by giving, not by taking, yes, that's individuality. Individuality doesn't just mean I can do whatever I want because I have no one to answer to, and I don't have to come home to nagging children or a tired spouse. Individuality means, as I said before, not what it is that you do, but why you do it. So a person can be in the most difficult situations and remain an individual. I mean, I don't want to use this example because I'm going to use it, but I'd rather not. But sometimes when you hear stories of Holocaust stories, of Jews, of what they did under certain circumstances. So as I said, I never wanted to be under those circumstances, but you see unbelievable acts of heroism, individuality, but specifically in a place like that. Because unfortunately, when everything else is stripped away and the core of a person is revealed, sometimes it's in very painful situations where you see a person's uniqueness. Did the Nazis and the Germans do something that was conformist-driven or individualistic? I mean, I know it sounds almost like weird. They were, cold-blooded murderers. But they essentially, 100 million Germans became conformists for whatever reason. And even though 6 million Jews were killed, and not 6 million Germans, but those 6 million and their children and their grandchildren and their families and their nation lives on. And we have survived thousands of years of persecutions. How is that possible? The ones that are slaughtered, annihilated, killed, should be the ones that should disappear. Because it's not about the number, it's about the quality. And that element of freedom was never erased. Just because they killed 6 million Jews, they did not make the Jewish people slaves. Because the way they went to their deaths and what they left over remains freedom. If a Jew was able to go to a gas chamber and sing Ani Mamin, even though it sounds so weird to us, that's a sign of freedom. To not give in even to that pain because his faith or her faith held them higher. That story where they tell about this Holocaust victim who, right before he was shot, so he was seen mumbling something. So it was one of the German torturers said to him, "What are you mumbling there?" So he says, "I'm thanking God." Well, what are you thanking God for? Look at you. You're miserable, about to die. This is what your God has allowed you to happen to you. So he said, "I'm thanking God for not creating me like you." That's what he said. So they tell the story. I don't know if it's a true story. I never heard it from first hand or second hand, but that's what they say. But it's a very powerful story, simply because the dignity of a standard, of a value. So yes, I'm not taking away from the pain. And why did the Jews have to die? I'm not even getting into that. But you can kill my body, you're not going to kill my values. You can kill everything about a person, but you're never going to take away my independence. And my independence is what I believe in, and what I stand for, and what I know my children, if not me, my children will prevail. And if not them, their children. That's what Abraham committed to. And that's why he's remembered as the single greatest free spirit, because he did not buy into anything. He did not buy into the glory of his time. You can get all the awards in the world, and you can get all the honors, but there are people who will be remembered 1,000 years from now, and some will not. And you look at who's remembered. The ones that are remembered are the ones that did not buy into the moment of what other people thought was important. They held on to something which is sublime, you can call it ethereal, spiritual, godly, whatever word it is, but it's never man-made. Because everything man-made is simple. Anything born dies. Anything man-made, just like it was built, it will be broken. Everything erodes. Everything is subject to those rules. That is where conformity thrives. But the trap is so deep because we are so much a product of this world that we forget. And that soul remains trapped, waiting to be released, waiting to be unique, waiting to sing its own song, and has to contend with you and I, who are so seduced by the world around us. pretty difficult. How do you hold on to such values? So in the Holocaust, that's why I said that the example is a difficult one to mention. In the Holocaust, unfortunately, it was just the circumstances that forced the Jews to simply hold on to the only thing they had left, their dignity. They had nothing else left. How do you hold on to it? Thank God in peaceful times. Right now, when things are pretty good. I understand the economy is not that great, but you can't compare it. How do you hold on to when you walk through the day and you wake up and you can do what you want and not accountable to anybody? It's not that simple. We are products of the environment in which we are in. We're victims of it. We're also victimizers of it, unless we do something different. And the difference is that you, in some way, separate yourself and realize I am not a product, nor am I a victim of the world and environment that has shaped me. And there's a part of me that always remains separate from it and free from it. And that part is called the soul, which is why the single best reason why your soul is so important to you, should be the most important to you. And these are some of the methods that I described that are the ways, the offering, to become a giver, to become a producer, someone that creates something. That's when your uniqueness begins to emerge. So this is a theme which I will continue to discuss in the coming weeks, especially the methods, because as you can understand, it's not that simple to free yourself from the tentacles of forces that have shaped us for so long. So it's a constant work, it's constant effort. But part of it is, as I said, taking the initiative, doing something that is somewhat different. I remember, and I want to mention this, Philip Namaworth, who usually gives a class Thursday night. I should mention tomorrow night he won't give it because he's not feeling so well. He will resume next week. But I remember years ago, maybe 20 years ago, he was coming to this class every week. And then, weak heart. I think it's stronger than he thinks it is, but sometimes he had a problem. He couldn't come to the class. And he felt bad. He wanted to come. He was learning much, and he wanted to come. And I remember speaking to him on the phone. So I said to him, why don't you start your own class at your home? Which shocked him. He said, what am I going to teach? I said, whatever you can teach, you teach. Or talk. So he invited a guy called, what was his name? Aronson. Josh Aronson, right? Filmmaker. And they started talking, and they brought another friend. And Philip built his own little class. And he often shares with me how that not only empowered him, and he really became a teacher through that process. And I always think about it, well, the context of what we're talking about here. Now, had he come to my class, yes, I'm sure he would have learned, and he said he would learn. And he would learn more things, and he still learns, which is great. But I'm obviously much prouder because what happened was his uniqueness had to emerge that way. Not that he didn't gain anything. Maybe much what he learned here helped him access that uniqueness. So be it. But the bottom line is that challenge turned him into a creator. And his uniqueness, his individuality. Now, he happens to be a songwriter and a musician and a creative person as it is. But you can speak to him and he'll tell you how he's integrated it to, how it helped him. So you see in situations, and he didn't hardly consider himself a scholar, even though he's quite good. But back then, what he knew, and he shared. And because he initiated that, it changed his life and changed many other lives. And that is something that will live on forever. That was, had he been a conformist, what he would have done is, listen, I'm not feeling well. Self-pity, blah, blah. I'll read a little, I'll feel guilty, I'll prepare to come to a class one day. Wasn't at all, none of that. There was one act of defiance, so to speak. Not to say that he suddenly was reckless with his health, was that he began to do something. I'm just using it as a small example. I don't know if he's watching this class, but often he does. Maybe he'll catch this. If not, you'll send him a YouTube clip. But I'm just giving an example. I can give you hundreds of other examples. These are not necessarily dramatic examples, but they're all small little things. A little turn, a little twist at a moment when you can give in and do what everyone would have done, or you take an initiative and do something a bit different. And I could definitely give you more examples. Ultimately, each of you is your own story, and that's part of individuality. So I can't continue to be more generic, or else it'll defeat the whole purpose of the message here. So you have to apply all of this to yourself. Think, come up with something creative that fits you. Only you can do that. I cannot do that. I can help you a little. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer them. But you need your voice here. How can you apply this to your life? Think of your life. Think of the things that how you react usually, and where it is that you can so-called twist it a bit differently, different direction. And you'll see, you do that, that can be your salvation. That can be your opening. That begins to create a new channel that is not the one that was imposed upon you, even in your earliest formative years when you had no control over. So, may God bless everybody. One little thing, and that is just make that move, and you'll see how things can change. So, with that being said, I will also want to say that happy birthday. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, to Yanis Suits. Yes? Yanis, that's how you pronounce it? 20th birthday? Oh. So may you have a very good birthday. You should have a lot of nachas from it, a lot of joy and pleasure. You have only one child? Oh, so from both your children. And may he discover his individual voice without too much pain. And the same I wish upon everybody here. And again, as I said, if you have any questions about this, please, this is the point of the Meaningful Life Center, is to not just to listen to Simon Jacobs speak, but to challenge you to express your voice, even if it contradicts mine. But remember, if you do any contradicting, we're going to ask you to say something original of your own. So, so prepare. But really, it's the greatest blessing to be able to feel that part of helping people liberate, I guess, their soul and find their individual voice. So, as you emerge, please share with me because it gives me a little nachas too. Okay. So, I wish everybody a great week. And let's see, tomorrow night again, Philip's class will not be tomorrow, Thursday. However, next Thursday, yes, I will continue my class next Wednesday. And for those that we are in touch in cyberspace, action continues 24/7, basically. The weekly emails. If you don't get the email, if we don't have your email, please give us your email. And more to come, a lot more to come in this place as we develop it and grow. So stay tuned. I would also like to invite you personally to the lecture that we usually do. This is a personal invitation. My father, in honor of my father's passing, so we've established an annual lecture in his name. It's called the Gershon Jacobson Annual Lecture. So this will be the fourth one, be delivered by Malcolm Hoenlein, a Jewish activist, a leader, and good speaker. He'll be on the topic of the media and the silencing of support for Israel. And it will be June 30th at 6:45 at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park. So mark it down, and please, it's a free lecture, and so just RSVP either my office or by email. So because it usually sells out. And we want to just make sure everybody who reserves now just gets it, so we don't have what we had 2 years ago, which was a big traffic mess. Not everybody could have gotten it when Elie Wiesel gave the lecture. Okay, so that's on a personal note in my honor of my father. Let's see, any other announcements? Am I missing anything? And as usual, I want to say again, if anybody has any questions, individual questions, you can access me. You can speak to Belleville, Eleanor, another good friend of ours who's helping out. And it's an honor to be part of your soul's journey. Thank you very much. Good evening.